Energy meter readers, you have been talking to me on social media about Alberta's Bill 22. And one of the things it does, amongst many actually, is shifts the administration of the Alberta teachers' pensions over from their own organization or administration over to AIMCO, which is the investment arm of the Alberta government. That could be problematic, and union members and teachers alike are very concerned. And we're going to talk about that today with Gil McGowan, who is the head of the Alberta Federation of Labour. So Gil, welcome to the interview.
Hi, Markham. It's nice to be here.
Now, I want to say right at the start that this is the Kenney government has not said they plan to do this. Kenney government has not hinted, but it is a possibility that when the money, that this transition takes place, they may do more. They may do more like the Caisse de dépôt in Quebec and include more provincial economic development focus, in which case Enco could look for opportunities to invest in the oil and gas company, oil and gas sector. And right now, Alberta has a juniors and mid-caps industry that's in big financial trouble and can't get capital. But that would be a risky investment. Your thoughts?
Well, before I answer the question directly, I just want to correct some of the remarks that you made at the outset. This is not just about the teacher's pension. That's the pension plan that's got the most attention. But Bill 22, in addition to firing the investigator who was investigating the UCP, which is basically the government using its power to trample democracy, that's gotten the biggest amount of attention, I think quite rightly, by the media and the public. But this is an omnibus bill, and it also makes sweeping changes to the way our big public sector pension plans are administered. So in particular, from our perspective, what's happening here is a money and cash grab by the Kenney government. They see these very large pools of capital, which are under the control of the teachers' pension plan, the local authorities' pension plan, the public service pension plan, and of course, I think your listeners and readers should remember that this is not the only pool of capital that Kenney and crew have been talking about. They also want to get their hands on the contributions that Albertans make to the CPP, right? So we've heard that. That's not included in Bill 22, but he's floated this idea of withdrawing Alberta from the CPP, taking the $40 billion of contributions that Albertans make every year and putting it under the control of AIMCO, which is a crown corporation of the provincial government. So anyway, huge pools of capital. So we're talking about multi-billion dollars and the important point from our perspective is that this is worker savings. They're saving for themselves, for their own retirement. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars of personal savings. And Kenney, with Bill 22, is basically saying that the government will take control of those pools of capital.
Now, here's why my readers have been raising issues with me about the safety of those investments should AIMCO decide to invest in the Alberta oil and gas. So we know juniors and mid-caps were hit really hard in the downturn starting in late 2014, and prices plunged over 2015 and 2016. Started to recover nicely in 2017, and then in late 2018, the wheels fell off, and now they're in trouble again. And we have a lot of damaged balance sheets. We have a lot of companies, and this is the key point, who cannot get capital or are being required to pay much more than they have in the past for capital. And that means we could be seeing corporate failures. We could be all sorts of the natural gas sector is in big trouble. A group of 9 companies sent a letter to Premier Kenney a few months ago saying that if something wasn't done in the next 12 months, perhaps as many as a dozen companies could fail. And it just seems coincidental, or maybe not so coincidental to me, that at the very time that capital is required in a big way in one sector, we have Bill 22. Coincidence or no, in your opinion?
No, we don't think it's a coincidence, and this is exactly what we're worried about. The way that these big public sector pension plans are currently run, they're basically run by the people who contribute to them. So the workers on one hand and the employers on the other hand. And we form our own pension boards, we make decisions about investment, and we have what's called a fiduciary responsibility to the people who contribute to the plan. So teachers, doctors, nurses, all municipal workers, school board workers, they contribute their money to these pension plans, and they use them as a vehicle for saving for their own retirement. And we as the administrators have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that their money is well managed. That means try to get the best possible return. And that's why Bill 22 is such a big concern for us. It basically says that we'll no longer be able to make the decisions for the plans anymore. It'll be put in the hands of the politicians who have a different agenda. Their concerns are different from the concern of the people who are putting their money into these plans. So they can't be fiduciary, right? And so what we're worried about very specifically is that they're going to take this money, these huge pools of capital, Albertans' own savings, and invest them in a way that is not responsible from a fiduciary point of view. That might include an as yet defined hidden agenda about investing in the oil and gas sector, which, as you say, is struggling. The Albertans who invest in their retirement through these plans don't have a problem with the oil and gas sector, but they also don't want to use their retirement savings to gamble on a sector that's struggling. That's the opposite of a fiduciary responsibility. If individual investors want to invest, make risky investment, that's fine, but the government shouldn't be making those decisions on behalf of people who didn't give them permission to do it.
Gotcha. Now let's be really clear. I was going through the AIMCO annual reports, and the way this would have to work, I assume, is that the government appoints new members to AIMCO's board, which then would bring in new policies. It's not as if Premier Kenney can sit in his legislature office and dictate what AIMCO has to do. So there's a process, but then they change policy.
He can do that.
Oh, now that's interesting. Can he do that under Bill 22?
Yes. Well, he can do it under previously existing legislation, because people keep in mind that AIMCO is an investment agency, but it is a wholly owned and controlled crown corporation of the government of Alberta. And under previous legislation, the government can give directives to any crown corporation to do whatever they want with those crown corporations, including AIMCO. And that's what makes us worried, right? And one of the things that Bill 22 did, we as the administrators of these big pension plans, we had the right to opt out of using AIMCO as an investor for all these big pools of capital if AIMCO lost our confidence, right? And that was a very, very important point. So we basically could hold them at bay if they were going to do something that we thought was irresponsible with these big pools of savings that people had put aside. But with Bill 22, they've actually the Kenney government has taken that ability to opt out of AIMCO away from us, and basically says, you shall use AIMCO. That's bad enough because it basically creates a pure government monopoly. But as a crown corporation, the Kenney government can give directives to the corporation about how to invest the money, and they might invest it in things that are risky and would put all this retirement savings at risk.
Now, we should point out, I mentioned the case a little bit earlier, and the point there is that it has a mandate to do economic development within Quebec, and it has made some risky investments in SNC-Lavalin and Bombardier, two examples that were given to me. And the concern, if I understand you correctly, would be that the government directs AIMCO to do that kind of a strategy. They invest in risky, the Alberta equivalent of Bombardier in the juniors and mid caps. And next thing you know, those firms are in trouble, and that money has been lost. And do that enough times on a bigger scale, and you've got big problems for people's savings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So now you were saying when we were talking about the administration prior to, or how these pensions, have you sat on these boards and exercised that fiduciary responsibility and the caution that goes with it?
Yeah, well, the way the pensions were set up before Bill 22 was passed, and I'll just stress that it was passed. This is a very complicated bill, 172 pages of legislation that made amendments to 11 pieces of legislation, very complex piece of legislation. It was introduced on a Monday, it was passed on a Thursday with only a handful of hours of debate. The government rammed it through, and you know, a very complex bill. It was not given the proper attention. But before Bill 22 was introduced, the plans were what we call, they had what we call independent joint governance. So the people who paid for the plan, the workers and the employers, they jointly govern the plans themselves. So, you know, the big unions that represent public sector workers who contribute to the plan, we appointed half of the board members, and the employers like, you know, Alberta Health Services, the big municipalities, the school boards, they appointed the other half. And so joint governance basically 50-50 employer worker, and then we would have to negotiate, you know, what the benefits of the plan, the administration of the plan. So your question was, do I sit personally on the board? I am actually the chairperson of what we call the sponsor board for the local authorities pension plan, which is the largest pension plan in the province, covering about, you know, 300,000+ workers and retirees, and it administers about $45 billion of pension assets. These are savings that people have put aside every month, every year, for year after year. That's what the government has seized, control of those assets. And you know, with Bill 22, what they're saying is that we will no longer be able to appoint our own people on those boards directly. The people, and you know, best practice in pensions, in pension governance basically says those who pay the freight should make the decisions. But now with Bill 22, it's going to be politicians who don't have an interest in actually making sure the retirement savings are well managed. They're the ones who are going to be making the decisions, because they'll be able to appoint whoever they want to the boards.
Well, it's very interesting that you sit on this board, Gil, because it gives you an insight into how the process works and the values and I think the thing I was really getting at most was the issue of risk tolerance. How much tolerance do I was talking to the media fellow at AIMCO, and he was making the point that AIMCO administers 31 pensions for 31 organizations and so on, and all of them have different appetites for risk. And so if what I understand from you is that when the union or the workers representatives sit on these boards, then they can decide for themselves how much risk they want to take on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now they've lost that.
Well, they will say that we still get, because like in the letter of the law is that we still get to determine risk tolerance. And that's one of the things that our sponsor board was actually in the midst of doing as the legislation was being introduced. But they're going to reserve the right for themselves to give directives to AIMCO that we're afraid will override our decisions based on risk tolerance. So we'll make the decision about risk tolerance. We'll still be able to do that, but it could be ignored and overridden by the Minister of Finance under this legislation.
Gil, this is excellent. It's a very, very interesting and useful insights for my readers into what is really a very complex topic that not many of us understand, and really appreciate that. Any final thoughts?
Well, people have to understand, that this money, and basically we wrote a column, a statement from all the union leaders today, and that was in the Herald and the Journal, and we basically said we had a three-part message for the government. The first was that this isn't their money. It's the money that's been set aside by literally, tens of thousands of Albertans in good faith for their own retirement. And so, it's more than ironic to have a conservative government that, purports to be defenders of individual rights and property rights, saying that essentially that they're going to seize someone else's savings. That's the first thing. The first message was, this is not it's not your money. Keep your hands off of it. The second message that we had for the government was that you don't have our permission. There was no consultation. This was never mentioned in the Conservative platform during the recent election, but yet they're doing it. And then third, they don't have our confidence, right? I mean, like this is, this is the money that people are counting on for their own retirement. And what we're saying to them is that as the representatives of these 300,000 plus Albertans who are counting on this money for their retirement, we have no confidence in the UCP's ability to administer these funds or manage them in the best interest of the people who put the money there. And we are worried that they're going to, turn these huge pools of capital into a political, essentially a political slush fund that they will use to fund as yet defined pet projects that might include investment in risky oil and gas plays. The final thing I'll say is that there is a reason that the juniors and the mid caps are having a hard time raising capital. The markets are saying that they're risky. They don't have a lot of confidence in them. So why should ordinary Albertans risk their pension income, their hard saved pension income that they're counting on? Why should they be forced against their will and without their consent to risk their retirement savings on investments that the markets are giving a thumbs down to?
Gil, thank you very much for this. We look forward to chatting with you in the very near future, I'm sure, about this issue. It's not going away, and I imagine we'll see plenty of wrinkles before over the next little while. So thank you very much.
Okay, my pleasure. Thanks, Marco.